Hello, everyone, and welcome to Encounter Church. My name is Sam. I'm the hospitality director here, and I just want to welcome you to our digital worship experience. This is something we put together every weekend so you can encounter God wherever you are. We'll begin shortly with a message from the scriptures, followed by worship. So we encourage you to stick around after the sermon to join us in worship. But for now, let's listen to this week's message.
Hello, everybody. Welcome. If this is your first time, my name is Joel. I'm the lead pastor of Encounter, and we're really glad that you're joining us. We're on week 2 of a series that we're calling Teach Us to Pray. And as the name tells, it's about learning how to pray. Last week, we looked at how we believe that prayer is kind of like at the core of what's needed to fuel the Christian life as a church and individually. Like the secret that we need for the power of God to move in our lives is found in spending time with God, in intimacy with God through prayer, and that's where God moves. So what we're trying to do is kind of like just learning how to develop a strong and robust prayer life in our own, daily life, in our own daily schedules. And it's fascinating because as a pastor, for years, whenever I talk to people, sometimes I will ask about, somebody's prayer life. And I don't do this to shame them, honestly. I'm trying to kind of like help them, develop a stronger faith. And I was surprised at the beginning of how often I would kind of like just get like a blank stare on the other end of the conversation. And I felt almost bad. Like I said, I don't want to shame you. I was just asking because I would like to help you kind of like build a prayer life. And what I realized is that, kind of like in the non-denominational church world, because we kind of like, in the aftermath of the Protestant Reformation, we tried to do with a lot of ritual that kind of like felt like it was a means of earning God's love or earning God's salvation. And we say, no, it's salvation and God's love, it's a gift, it's by grace through faith. But on the other end of that, what happened is that nobody gave us any like practical tools, kind of like, prayer, just talk to God. And then when you're in your room and you're trying to talk to God, you don't know what to say. And it's just you looking at a wall, like, how in the world can I like pray right now? And what's fascinating about this is that this is not a modern problem. It's not something that only happens to us. If you go back to the New Testament, to the very first followers of Jesus, the disciples that were with Jesus, they had the same issue. In the Gospel of Luke, chapter 11, verse 1, the disciples were talking to Jesus, and the way it says, one day, Jesus was praying in a certain place, and when he finished, one of his disciples said to him, Lord, teach us to pray, just as John taught his disciples. Apparently, in the New Testament, prayer was something that was taught, that was passed on from, a rabbi to his disciples. John the Baptist teaches his disciples, and now Jesus' disciples are asking Jesus to teach them how to pray. Prayer must be taught. And I would argue that part of the problem is that the church has been so bad at teaching it. That I've sat through sermons about prayer that I've heard, the whole series, and I've walked away and not learned one thing about how I can actually develop a prayer time in my life. But the problem is that we're so afraid of giving you any sort of instruction that would sound like it's legalistic or that would offend people, that we err on the side of kind of like telling you, hey, use whatever you feel like. And that's not helpful either. So my attempt is I want to give you, some theological framework of why prayer is important and why it matters and how we should approach it, but also give you some practical tools, actually, how to create a daily prayer time in your life. So that's kind of like the goal of the series. Now, before we get into the actual how-tos, I would like to give a little bit of like, what I think is like the preliminary stage, the preliminary setting that facilitates prayer the best. You're watching right now a recorded sermon that we do. We shoot it earlier in the week. And we don't just kind of like show up and start recording. There's a production company that we work with that are really good friends of our church that help us with this. And, they come like 2 hours before and they set up lights and cameras and microphones. And I'm doing work, preparing to teach this. So I read and I pray and I do research and kind of like put the sermon together. Before the camera, blinks with the red light and starts recording, there's this preparation time that needs to happen so that the recording can flow in the best way possible. I would argue that it's the same with prayer. That there are certain things that we can do, that we can create a setting that then facilitate the prayer time. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. If you have a Bible and you want to read along or just follow on the screen, I'm going to be on Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 6. That's what it says. And without faith, it is impossible to please God. Because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. Now, I think that this verse has two very fundamental ideas about the right approach to prayer. Number one is what the purpose of prayer should be. How does this verse end? It says, he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That apparently approaching God is not, it's not about what we want from God, what we need from God, what I get from God. But approaching God in prayer is about God himself. Because that the people that actually get to enjoy prayer, the people that actually get to experience the power of God through prayer, are the people who are earnestly seeking not something from God, but who are earnestly seeking God. That the core of prayer, the way in which our mind and our hearts must be set, it's like, this is a time that I'm coming to be with God. Now, Jesus kind of makes that point when he teaches the Lord's Prayer. And we're going to talk about the Lord's Prayer in another sermon in this series, but the Lord's Prayer opens with the line, Our Father. Now, you read that, and when I originally read that, I thought it was kind of just the address at the beginning of the letter, like Dear Mr. or Dear Mrs. or whatever, like the God's letter was Our Father. But when you think about that phrase, there's a lot in that phrase. Because it's Jesus teaching his disciples, and Jesus is not saying to his disciples, my Father, right? Or he's not saying, the unknown deity formerly known as Yahweh. He's not saying, the mysterious force behind the universe. No, he's telling the disciples, if you're going to pray, you have to see God as your Father. You're not coming to a stranger. You're not coming to an angry God. You're not coming to a being who wants to destroy you. You're coming before your Father. And listen, I say that, and some of you have probably a bad experience with your father. So hearing this doesn't help. And I'm really sorry for that. I don't mean it to be like that. But I think that what Jesus is actually doing is to redeem the idea of the Father. That even if we've had bad experiences with our fathers, that the God that we're coming is not like that. He's a different type of Father. He's a good Father. And we're entering into prayer we're coming to talk to our Father. We're coming to relationship. When relationship is the primary motivator of prayer, our prayers are different. Tim Keller in a book about prayer says this. He says, consider how different this is from the normal way we use prayer. In a natural state, we pray to God to get things. Seldom or never do we spend sustained time adoring and praising God. In short, we have no positive inner desire to pray. We do it only when circumstances force us. Why? We know God is there, but we tend to see him as means through which we get things to make us happy. For most of us, he has not become our happiness. We therefore pray to procure things, not to know him better. And for a lot of us, that's the kind of initial approach to prayer. And that's why prayer feels like a chore, because we're trying to we feel like we have to convince God to help us. But when we don't come to that, when we come to our Father, there's a confidence, but there's also a joy in coming to speak to our good Father, which will propel us to keep doing it day after day after day. So that's the first thing, what our purpose is. Now the second thing in the verse says, without faith, it says it's impossible to please God because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. The writer of Hebrews is saying the attitude in which we come to God has to be an attitude of faith. And here in this particular verse is making faith to be two things. One is believing that God exists. Now, it can sound on one end silly. Of course you have to believe that God exists if you're praying. Or it can sound a little bit legalistic. Maybe your prayer life is not good because you don't believe hard enough. It's your fault. And I don't think that it's either of those things what he's trying to say. I think that what he's trying to say is, well, if you think about prayer for a second, like just objectively, it's kind of an odd thing, right? Like you're in a room and either you're like, with your eyes closed in silence, or you're, with your eyes closed speaking aloud, and there's nobody else in the room and there's a wall. And, it looks odd from the outside. Except if the God of the universe is actually present there. Now, we've talked about this in the past, that what the Bible says, that there is no place that God isn't. That God's everywhere, and that God's present. And what we need to do is kind of like open our eyes to the awareness of God's presence. Well, how do we do that? We do that through faith. So faith is kind of like taking the step of moving forward as an act of belief, not as an act of doubt. That when we speak to God, when we pray to God, we're saying, God, nobody's here that I can see, but I believe that you're here. I believe that you listen to me. Saying, if you want to pray, you have to believe God is there. Faith is kind of like what bridges the gap between what you can see and the invisible but real presence of God. But then he also says, it's not only that we have to believe that he exists, he says, we have to believe that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. And what he's trying to say is that we have to believe that this is a good God. That he's not a God that doesn't want to talk to us. This is not a God that would rather do something else. This is not a God that we have to do cartwheels in front of so he pays attention to us. That this is a God who loves us and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. That he's there and that he listens and that he cares. So, those two things are kind of like, I would say, kind of like the frame of mind and spirit and heart in which we approach prayer. The purpose of relationship and attitude of faith. Now, there's also a setting that's more about like the context of the form in which we pray. Jesus, on Matthew chapter 6, which is the Matthew's gospel version of the Lord's Prayer, starts with this. He says, verse 5, and when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray, standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by others. Truly, I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. Now, there's a lot there, but the key aspect seems to be that when we're talking about like the daily discipline of praying, of seeking God, that there is something to privacy, that there is something to this being a thing that's just between you and God. And I would argue that's for a couple of reasons. One is that it's a way of checking your heart attitude. He's saying that at that time, it was very common for like religious people to kind of like do this out in the open. And the reason why they were doing it out in the open wasn't because they were like so passionate about God, they couldn't wait to get home to pray. It was actually because they didn't necessarily care about God. They care about being seen by others. They care about kind of like people knowing how spiritual they were. Now, I don't see that many people out on the streets praying like that today. But you know what I see? I see social media posts about people talking about how great their prayer time was there, right? And like the typical like influencer pictures, like super nice, a cup of coffee, like, Jesus and coffee today. And we laugh about it, but we've seen that, and sometimes we do that. And I've done that in the past, to be honest with you. And maybe we should check our hearts and think, why are we doing that? Are we entering into this prayer time so we can get this Instagrammable moment that people can look at and think how spiritual we are, or that we can tell ourselves how spiritual we are? Or are we doing it because we want to spend time of intimacy with God? And maybe like a good practice just to like not do that anymore and to focus our time. This is just time between me and God. There's something about checking the motivation of our heart when we do it in secret. But I would argue that it's also an element of this that's about just helping your mind and your heart get into the right setting for this. Because, I love this. Let's say you wake up, you brush your teeth, and maybe you check your phone, and as soon as you open your phone, you are like bombarded by emails, by social media notifications. And before you get out of your bedroom, your mind is already racing with things that you have to deal with at work, or things that you're seeing on the news, and you're dealing maybe with anger or sadness or anxiety. And then you try to sit down and pray, and your mind is racing with all these things, and it's just so hard to even like enter into the space of prayer. And part of what Jesus is saying, no. If you're gonna enter into prayer, you have to kind of like push all those things aside. Maybe the idea of like going to your room is a symbol for like push everything aside and make this time just between you and God. So what I found for myself is that a practical way of doing that is create some sort of buffer between everything that's happening in the world and my prayer time. The way that looks like for me personally, this is for me, but maybe it'll be helpful, is I try to pray in the same place every day. Like you says, go into your room. There's another translation that says go into your prayer closet, like a specific place that every day kind of like your mind sees it and just associates it with prayer. Maybe for some of you, you don't have that place at home. Maybe you can go out for a walk and it's like the same route all the time. And what you're doing is kind of like creating this routine that creates, this association with your body and your brains and your mind that this is a prayer time. That kind of like that's what we're doing in that moment. I personally like to listen to worship music to kind of like, push all these other things away. So I'll put some headsets, I'll play some worship music. I like to drink coffee in the mornings. So I've turned kind of like the making coffee almost into kind of like this ritual. And I'm not, trying to be weird about it. It's just like, I need coffee. But also, the Bible talks about lifting up, a good aroma unto the Lord. Well, the aroma of coffee beans is very, very appropriate and the Lord enjoys it. But anyway, so I take my time and I'm like, the weird guy that like grinds the beans and the whole deal. So like, but for me, that's a time of not just of making coffee, it's a time of kind of like easing into what I'm about to do, which is pray. I have moments where I'll kind of like, I try to sit down or maybe like light a candle. Not because there's any like magical powers to the candle, just because it helps kind of like settle my mind on what I'm about to do. I'm creating kind of like this space between anything else that's going on and the prayer time. I try to enter into some moment of silence. I've shared that a few years ago. I dealt with some, anxiety and depression. And one of the therapists I was seeing just recommended me these breathing exercises that would help kind of like calm my mind whenever I was having these anxiety attacks. And I've kept them. I keep doing them, not because of the anxiety attacks now, but because it helps kind of like ease my mind from anything else that's going on into my time with God. So I'll close my eyes and I'll start breathing in, and, inhaling and exhaling and repeating that over a period of time. And very slowly what happens is that all of the other things I'm thinking about, I stop thinking about them for a second. And what I do then is I kind of like, I just tell God, like, I'm available to you now. Because ultimately that's what prayer is, right? Like we wake up and the second that we open our life, we make ourselves available to our office. We make ourselves available to our high school friends. We make ourselves available to our family, to anybody that wants to get a hold of us. Prayer is how we make ourselves available to God. So for me, kind of like I use that spot, that time to make myself available to God. Maybe something that might be helpful to you is, having some sort of like anchor thing that you read or say that kind of like helps center your mind. Some people like will actually recite the Lord's Prayer before having their prayer time, just because it kind of like helps their brain kind of like realize that this is a different time than other times. I like to read a psalm aloud every day before I start praying, because that kind of like eases me into a time. What am I doing? I'm creating that room that Jesus is talking about in my mind, and blocking all these other things away and focusing on God. Now, I think there's another element where the idea of the room matters. And it's because this is a conversation between two people. I don't know if you had, meaningful relationship in your life. Maybe it's a significant other, family member, friends. And a lot of times you'll have these normal conversations like, making plans for dinner or going to a game or something like that. And every once in a while you'll have significant conversations, meaningful conversations about things that matter, and you make yourself vulnerable and you open yourself up and share things from the heart. And a lot of times those conversations just happen between you and the other person, looking at each other into the eyes. Maybe it's like, over dinner or somewhere that just the two of them talking. Doesn't usually happen when there's like a lot of people making noise and going around. And maybe prayer is this time where we have that meaningful conversation with God. That this is not a transactional thing. This is a relational space. And that's where the idea of doing it in the secret, in the room, in the closet, as some of the translations say, matters and it's important. I want to close with this. My mom's favorite Bible verse is Psalm 37:4. It says, "Take delight in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." And that verse can be read in a number of ways, right? One is like, hey, if you enjoy being in the presence of God, God's going to give you everything you want. And I think that might not maybe, but I think that underneath that is this idea that the more you take delight in the Lord, the more that your desires change. Because you are in the presence of God. God changes you when you're in His presence. And so it's kind of like turning you into somebody that looks like His Son. We've talked about this in the past. Now, prayer is the way in which we get to the light. One of the best theologians of the last century is a man named J.I. Packer. He died a few years ago. And he has a book that he calls Praying. And the subtitle of the book is Finding Our Way Through Duty to the Light. And the argument that he makes in the book is that, prayer can very much feel like duty. Like something that I have to do and I don't want to do. And it's hard to concentrate and I don't know how long I have to pray. And I feel like, what am I doing here? I'd rather do something else. It feels like I'm wasting my time. All these things. But what he's saying is like, if we persevere through that, what ends up happening is that our minds and our hearts start kind of like attuning themselves to God. To the point that now, the place where we find joy, where we find the light, is in the presence of God, which we enter through prayer. All the elements of prayer, like we're talking about petition and asking God for what we need. Well, in what context does that happen? It happens in the context of prayer, in the context that we're learning to take delight in the Lord. And what I'm telling you is this. Prayer right now might feel like a difficult thing. It might feel like a chore. It might feel like something that you have to do. And what I'm telling you is that if you give yourself to it, if you give it the time, if you make the effort and discipline yourself, it's going to become something that you get to do. That you get to experience the delight of the Lord in prayer. And it's in that place where God meets us, where God heals us, where God is with us, and where God gives us the desires of our hearts. Because the desire of our heart becomes God. Grace and peace.
Hello again. We hope that this message was a blessing to you and is helpful on your faith journey. If this is your first time joining us, or maybe you've joined us for a few times before and are looking to get involved further, we would love to connect with you. We have a digital connection card. You can go to encounterdc.com/connect. For every connection card we receive, we set aside some money to do some good in our community. We also have a special gift for you for filling out a card. You can share as much or as little information as you like, ask us any questions, and find out how you can get involved in the life of the church. I also want to thank everyone who supports Encounter through your generosity. Your giving allows us to do everything we do, from serving our community to creating content like this. If you'd like to give, you can go to encounterdc.com/give. You can make a one-time gift, or you can set up reoccurring giving. And now we encourage you to join us for worship. We invite you to listen, sing along, or use this time to just sit and reflect. Our hope is that you can experience God's presence during this time. So if you will, please join us in worship.
I'm not gonna wait for the walls to fall. I know a name that will bring them down. I've got a praise waking within my soul. I'm not ashamed to declare it now. The light of the world trampled the darkness. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Every word will be accomplished. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Prepare the way, the King of glory comes. Before his name, every fear must bow. Throw off your chains, Jesus destroyed them all. But from the grave, He is with us now. Oh, light of the world, trample the darkness. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Every word will be accomplished. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. The gates of hell can never stand a chance. Your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. No word will fail, no weapon formed against. Your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. The gates of hell will never stand a chance. Your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. No word will fail, no weapon formed against. Your name prevails, Jesus the great I am. Light of the world, trample the darkness. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Every word will be accomplished. Nothing can stop it. You are the God of the promise. Can't go back to the beginning. Can't control what tomorrow will bring. But I know here in the middle is the place where you promised to be. Not enough unless you come. Will you meet me here again? 'Cause all I want is all you are. Will you meet me here again? As I walk now through the valley, let your love rise above every fear. Like the sun shaping the shadow,